Welcome to the CommuniD Medical Device Marketing Monthly Talk live here on LinkedIn. We're speaking with marketing experts and leaders in the medical device industry. Now, our goal with these talks is to share real and unique stories, not just a theory or processes that everyone talks about. We hope you'll be able to take away actionable points that you can use tomorrow. Now, as always, I'm accompanied by my colleague, Elvia Gramignano, and this week we're talking with Des McCluskey about the transformation of the sales processes. A quick question for you before I get to Des. If you're watching us live, tell us on the chat where you're watching us from. And a reminder, you can ask Des questions throughout, and we'll keep an eye on the chat to answer them as we go along. But let's say hello to Des. Des, hello, welcome to the show, and thanks very much for coming along and giving us your time today. I'm not going to read out a biog or anything like that. I'll leave it to you. Give us a little bit of background and a little bit of information about where you've been, where you've come from, where you are now, for those who don't already know you.
Yes, so thank you, Mark. Thank you, Elvio, for the invitation to the show. So I'm based in the UK. I have spent 10 years in medical devices, mainly at Johnson & Johnson. And then for the last 12 years, I've had my own practice together with two partners called Podada, and we specialize in complex business-to-business sales. About half of our clients would be medical devices, diagnostics and MedTech companies. The other half would be non-medical device related organizations like BP and Visa and EY. And my particular subject is the sales process, and particular the sales and marketing process. So I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Oh, that's a pleasure. It's great to have you. We've got an audience from all over the globe, and just to get a little idea, we thought we might, I know you might have a couple of questions for them, just so we get an idea of where we sit with them, Des.
Yes, yeah, indeed. I think it would be good for Elvio and I to make sure that we're sharing the right insights for the right audience. We've seen from the participation list that we have people who are members of very large medical device organizations, the multi-billion-dollar crowd. We've also got small and medium-sized organizations. I just wanted to maybe share a slide because the idea of sales and marketing being digitally ready, different people appreciate this in different ways. So I always like to think of an organization's maturity around any of these things. Is your organization random, informal, formal, or dynamic? So this is my question to the audience is, how would you describe your own organization's maturity right now? It's okay. It can be just your opinion. It doesn't have to be statistically significant. But I was wondering if you could read those four descriptions. Random means everyone for themselves and there's nothing really started yet, right the way through to dynamic, which means that it's a strategic focus and you have constant feedback and a process improvement process in place. I would just be curious from the audience, where would you rank yourself at the moment? We'll gather that information, and then that'll help Elvio and I pick the right stories and maybe the right bits of advice, because this topic is very broad and it means different things to different people. Is that okay, Mark?
That sounds great. Yes, and if people would like to share that in the chat, we'll pick those out. We understand, of course, that some people may want to may feel a little bit don't want to lay it out there if they're if they feel they're in a different position. They may think they're random, but they're telling everybody else they're dynamic. We can see that, but we'll keep it confidential. We'll keep it if required. There's something I've observed. My background isn't medical device, but although I've been working with Elvio over the last 2 to 3 years in that area, and what I've observed is that there's quite a difference between the sales process in the sales process between medical device companies and other non-medical companies. Do you want to just outline them as you see that?
Yes, so I suppose medical devices have been lucky over the last 20 or 30 years because of how close their relationship has been with their customers. So at very high levels of loyalty compared to some of my customers in technology and other sectors. So I do believe that's one way in which the sector is very different. Elvia could probably comment more on the marketing side, but I would generally suggest that marketing, when we think about medical devices and diagnostics, is product management and very much product focus. I think marketing does a lot more roles sometimes in a medical device organization than it does in some other industry. So that's certainly one way for me in which those sectors can be slightly different.
Yeah, I would agree with what Des is saying. Clearly, I think we are in a period of transformation in which we are starting to listen more to the physician's needs and adapting the marketing message to the physician needs. But mainly, we're still focused on the product features and benefits.
Mm-hmm. And the customers changing as well, aren't they? I mean, it's something it used to be the old chap in the bow tie years ago as the primary customer, the orthopedic consultant, but that's changing. It's and arguably changing faster than the sales force is.
Yeah, you've seen that change in different sectors. So areas like diagnostics probably went through this change 10 years ago. Large medical devices probably saw that change very soon afterwards. But depending on the size of your organization, you may have come across that. It is still possible to be successful in sales by just selling to a narrow range of stakeholders. But generally, I think that if you've been in sales for the last 5 years, the number of people you now call on is much, much bigger and much greater. So that's certainly a trend. The buying complexity is only going one way in the sector at the moment.
And certainly things seem to have changed since COVID in terms of people's appetite for different channels and different approaches.
Yeah, I think Elvio and I read the same article. So there was a very nice study from McKinsey talking about the willingness of your customer to engage with you post-COVID in non-traditional forms, so not just face-to-face. So the data that McKinsey studied, I read the report when it was all industry sectors. And by coincidence, Elvio read the same report where they'd actually sliced the data for medical devices. And there was a definite trend where, because of COVID, customers had to engage with you in some other form, omni-channel or multiple routes to find you. And actually, they quite liked it, and they would like it to continue. That's fundamentally the reference that I took from the study. Elvio, from your perspective, what did you take from this when you read it?
Yeah, I took from the same interpretation. What is struggling? What I think will change is that the government will regulate the number of visits sales reps can have with physicians. I know that this is already happening in France, for instance, by law. It's happening in the UK. I think it will happen all over the world. So clearly, the ability of a sales rep to meet their clients will decrease.
And my understanding as well is it's not just the physician who's the decision maker or the key influencer, but there are other players as well who were formerly maybe gatekeepers, but now they're playing an increasingly active role in the sales process.
Yeah, so I would suggest that for the last 10 years, sales surgeons and physicians haven't been the ultimate decision maker, but the ultimate decision maker either wasn't involved or didn't care. And I think that has drastically changed now. They care for a number of reasons, and they are absolutely involved in the process. The interesting sub point, I suppose, to this McKinsey study, it's from an organization called CSO Insights. What they're saying now is that 10 years ago, salespeople were the number one trusted source of information for your customers, particularly in medical devices. Now, the sales rep is about 8th on the list. Still important, but things like peer-to-peer meetings, speaking to colleagues, references, case studies, they are just as important to your surgeons and your customers when they're making a decision. They don't just go to one source of information anymore. They look at a range of different routes to get information about you and your product and why they should change. So definitely you're now part of an ecosystem rather than the only tool that can be used to communicate with the customer. I think that's a definite trend for sure.
Yeah, well, we've got a comment up here from Jenny who says that she's definitely random, or the approach is random. So we've got that going on.
And I think that's pretty typical. If I look at the big organizations that I work with, the multi-billion-dollar medical device organizations, they're probably relatively informal. They do some digital sales and marketing alignment in some pockets and some places, but I don't think it's sophisticated. If you were to look at technology companies or management consultants or other organizations, they are far more likely to be more sophisticated than their medical device peers, I would suggest.
Is that maybe because the medical device a slightly more siloed operations, that something goes on there, something goes on there, or is it something else?
A difficult one in terms of the only reason. I think one of the advantages you have is you are a heavily regulated marketplace, which means that there is a very large barrier to entry, and therefore that can make you slightly lazy in terms of how you deal with your customers. That luxury is gone now with the ability of Far East competitors to kind of come and challenge you on price. I think a lot of that has been different. And also the fact that a lot of medical device organizations aren't able to directly market their patients. So the business to consumer bit is kind of a little bit missing in medical devices. Well, certainly in Europe. There's some of the reasons why it's certainly very different.
So a lot of people have tuned in. If you tune in on LinkedIn, I'm not sure what you tapped in on today, because they've seen that we're talking about transforming the sales process. So why is there so much interest, particularly now, in improving and transforming the sales process?
Well, if you look at what's happened at the moment, so access is a real challenge. So the idea of getting access to your customers as LVO managed is becoming more difficult. The main one that LV and I both see is the MDR regulations. So since 2018, profits across medical devices, according to McKinsey, haven't greatly increased. The shareholders are still getting a good return, but the profits haven't gone higher. And I think if you look at the medical device regulation requirement for a lot of organizations, some companies have chosen to withdraw products because it's going to cost them a lot to take those products to market following the new MDR. And I do think that organizations are now just starting to realize how expensive MDR is going to be. And if they need to save money, so do more with less, which I think is across every sector, I think that's even more acute in the medical devices space, where the MDR is going to cost a lot more of the marketing budget, and therefore costs and the way of serving the customer will need to change. So for me, that's the most compelling event. Alvi, I'm not sure if you see other compelling events right now.
Yeah, I see one of the most compelling events is clearly the fact that most of the companies are declining margins. So if we take a look at the reports, the EBITDA of most of the medical device company that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, were generally pretty stable and fat, they are now significantly declining. And the reason for this decline is the fact that in all industries, in all medical device industry, we're seeing a commoditization of the products that is bringing the price down. So clearly, this, in my mind, is a major driver, at least of the C-suite, that then is pushing it down to the old organization.
And if you look at a typical approach, Mark, at the moment, I would suggest that a marketing message is usually crafted around a new product or a solution. Takes anywhere from 6 months to 18 months for the marketing team and the sales team to get around to craft that message. They do very little testing of it. They craft it for a long time, and then they launch it. And the feedback loop takes a long time because typically it's a field-based seller having individual conversations with customers that then gives them the feedback loop. I think that's the bit that is antiquated and does and can change if the medical devices organizations see the value in it. And you can see the big boys have already moved that way. I think it's now the tipping point for the medium and small sized organizations to start to do the same and do things differently.
And in terms of those big boys, they're doing things differently, or they're just being more nimble, or they're exploring different channels to sort of short circuit the feedback loop, if that's the right way of putting it.
Definitely exploring all kinds of different channels, so different routes to market. They definitely segment their customers. I know for many years in medical devices, you wanted to give every single customer gold level service, and no one can afford that anymore, unfortunately. So you have to ask yourself the question, which customers deserve which routes to market? I think most of the big players that I work with have segmented their customers into the very, very large. So a strategic account management process for them. They then have the majority of their customers in the middle, and then they have what they call the long tail, which is small customers with small sites with very low revenue. And that tends to be the segment that they've moved to digital first. So the idea of segmenting your customers and not offering everyone the same is definitely a trend. But they're all starting to play with different things. Google Glass different ways of interacting with customers. They are experimenting, I think, a lot in this space right now.
Yeah. I've got a question for the audience out there. Are you noticing the same trends in your market, or are you noticing different trends? Do share that with you, and we'll share those with Des and comment on if appropriate. So we've got a number of reasons why the sales process is being examined and reconsidered. What are the options, Des? What's the secret sauce? If there's a secret sauce, what can folks?
We wish there would be, right?
Well,
Yes.
I know there's no secret sauce. There's not a magic bullet either, apparently.
No, and I think the first thing is to get a number of people in your own organisation to realise that the SG&A, so that the amount of money you have to spend on sales and marketing, is unlikely to be going up. It's likely to be going down, unless you're in the US or Japan, which is where most of the investment is coming from the investors for medical device and diagnostics, which means you have to do more with less. And I think the better way that we see with quite a lot of clients is making the marketing and sales closer aligned. So although I'm a one-trick pony, I've only ever done sales. LVO is a marketeer. He and I do belong to the same church, which is that making your marketing and sales engagement digital allows you a playground to try things faster, quicker, and get a quicker feedback loop. So the organizations that do that, in our experience, have much more predictable systems, and they're able to forecast their revenue, they're able to forecast their leads by automating it. And I think the technologies now are there to allow people to do it. So the excuse, which was technology was the barrier, I don't believe that is the case anymore. There's all kinds of technologies at every price point now, which means that every organization has the ability to do this and make this happen.
Elvio, is there anything you want to add in there to the?
No, I think I fully agree with what Des said. What I'm saying is that it's a little bit of a paradox of what Des is saying. You know, generally when the products are getting commoditized, and so the underlying reason for a choice is basically disappearing, you want to spend more on marketing, you want to spend more on the differentiation, you want to spend more on trying to create solutions that are really meeting the physician needs so that you can differentiate. And instead, it's true what Des is saying. We're seeing the opposite. And I have to say, most of the companies in the last 10 years have reorganized their production in order to cope with this decline of margins. They have reorganized now lately after the MDR, or let's say, I would call it a little bit in larger term, because it's not MDR only. It's MDR, FDA, TGA, PMDA. It's all the regulatory bodies are raising their bar to enter. After that, we have seen a huge reorganization of the R&D departments. Probably the only department that hasn't been touched is the sales and marketing department. And I think that digitalization of the sales process is one of the opportunities.
So Des, if you were to describe what an old sales process looks like, or one that's dragging its heels, if that's the right way, so that anybody listening goes, oh, hold on, that's us, and what it might look like in the future, and you go, all right, I know I've arrived, or I'm arriving, because it starts to look like this. How would you describe it?
Probably the simplest picture is that of a bow tie. You mentioned bow tie before, so I would suggest that if your organization's only contact point with your customer is through a single salesperson, then that is very high risk indeed. And I think that is the relationship that probably needs to change. It has its advantages for many, many years. So if that one person you employed had great relationships and was able to access the senior leadership, the physicians, and also the people who make things happen on the shop floor, then I think that relationship could function very well. The challenge now is that customers don't just go to that one person for their advice and information. They actually want to speak to a multitude of people. So that's one way. The second thing is if you're not using any form of customer relationship management technology. So I would suggest if you're not using systems that track your customers and track your interactions with them, you're probably behind the curve. And then I think the third one is around the mindset and the mastery of your organization. So both Elvie and I have worked with organizations where the mastery for marketing is about product expertise. The fact that they know everything and can talk to a surgeon or a physician, that's a very nice role to have. And the mastery of that drives a lot of behaviors. Likewise, I think salespeople want to also be the masters of the product. And I think that your organization, if the product and knowledge of the product is the most sacrosanct element of your sales and marketing culture, then you're probably missing out on the mastery of marketing, particularly digital marketing, and also missing out on the mastery of digital selling and engaging with a broader range of customers in a broader route of channels. So they were the things that sprang to mind when I was thinking about an outdated sales force or an outdated sales approach. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do I mean, it obviously requires a step change in within an organization to say, right, that's the way we're doing it at the moment. That's the way we've always been doing it. Kind of works, ain't broken. How can we shift it? How can marketing leaders out there shift that to the brave new world?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it needs to be a step change. I really don't. I would genuinely say you've probably got some top performers in your marketing organization, some top performers in your sales organization. Spend some time with them and ask them questions like, how do they think the customer's buying process is changing? Do they think there's a different way in which the customer is interacting with you? So I would start with your own organization. There probably are pockets of best practice already happening. And usually it's not revolution we're talking about here, it is evolution. And the idea of trying to understand how the customer buys and how your customer interacts with you, I think that's the first step. Even the big organizations haven't gone with a huge transformation. What they've done is they've segmented their customers and asked themselves very simple questions. Does this customer have to be served by a face-to-face salesperson throughout every stage of the buying process? So that is, if you think of sales, we often think of a funnel. So marketing is at the top of that funnel. Do we absolutely need someone with face-to-face capability at every stage through that funnel? There is a second funnel, though, for most organizations that have a run rate business, so a consumable element, is once you win the customer, you want to then land and expand. And that, again, is another way where a lot of organizations have said the only way to expand is to have a rep or a clinical support specialist, very expensive, very high resource intensive investments. And that's the only other way you grow your business. And I think LVO and I have got a number of case studies where that isn't the only way. And actually having digital or virtual contact points throughout that buying process at both ends is a way of streamlining it so that you keep your face-to-face resource for the really important accounts. And the idea that not every account needs that level of support and service, that's probably the first step to think about, is that not every customer is the same. So I don't think it's a step change, but it is a mindset shift, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So we shifted the mindset. What sort of tools, what sort of things are we doing now that we're on that journey? And noticing, I think it's important because that it is a worry when you think, oh, everything's going to turn around. You know, we've got to turn around this ocean liner. But actually, no, that's not, is it? It's just starting to add bits like that and get smarter in here, smarter there, smarter there. But what are the sort of things that you've seen that are making a difference to sales in the sales process out there?
So the first one is segmenting your customer, the idea that not every customer is the same. The second thing is some kind of task force that has the most senior person in sales and the most senior person in marketing together and aligned around the customer and the changes in the customer buying process. I think if that meeting or that conversation can happen, actually every business is different. So which project you choose to go first on, I find varies in different ways. I've seen a global diagnostic company, about $3 billion turnover. Their first step was to create a customer experience program. They wanted to train all of their marketeers, all of their sellers, and all of their customer service people on how do we delight the customer with customer experience. And that was a relatively large project where they changed their message and they went to all of their roles. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is an animal health organization I worked with, and they just started to change the way they measure their sales and marketing effectiveness. So they had a set of metrics that were antiquated. They didn't pick up things like text messages. They didn't pick up things like LinkedIn hits. They were tracking the wrong thing. They were tracking the face-to-face marketing and the face-to-face communication with the customer. They didn't start to track all of the little digital touch points, number of hits on our website, number of LinkedIn posts that they respond to. And they weren't necessarily tracking everything to make sure that all of those leads became a sales conversation. So that's it at the other extreme. Just finding a little project and getting going with that is another way. Elvio, I'm not sure if any other examples spring to mind for you.
No, I'm not. I wasn't thinking to the examples. I was more thinking to, and I have a question for you, Des. Most of the companies, to cope with this declining price, they are trying to make their sales force as a variable cost. And so they're trying to hire agents that are working on commission. So they say, okay, if I don't sell, I don't have a fixed cost. If I sell, then all right, I'll pay the commission.
Yeah.
How do you think this model is matching with the possibility of having agents?
Yeah, so like you, I've seen a big growth in agents, particularly in the middle band organizations, and it makes sense. It's more cost effective potentially. Depends on which customer you're going after, and it also has some big advantages in terms of scale. So you can scale very quickly with an indirect sales force. Two challenges with an indirect sales force. The first thing is, does your organization have the culture of working with them? So when I first became a manager at J&J, my first boss, a guy called Chris Norman, said to me, well done, I've given you the stick. You now have the power to control a sales organization. I don't want you to use the stick. I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. Imagine your team don't work for you, which is actually what happens when you have an indirect sales force, but this was a direct sales force. He said, how do you add value to their business every day? Would they pay using their own money for the time they spend with you? And that was an amazing piece of coaching that I got when I was managing my own sales team. That's so true when you're managing an agent. So you cannot control their mind share. So we all hope when we sign an agent that we have 80 to 90% of their mind share. They only love LVO's product and they only sell that all the time. That is not the case.
That is not. And Des, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Paul is asking another question that to me is really interesting. How do you apply a CRM, especially if you're working with an indirect sales force?
Yes. So one of the challenges, so I work with an organization called Miller Hyman, and they're part of Korn Ferry. They do a lot of research into indirect channels. 2 things that are a little bit concerning when it comes to an indirect channel. 80% of the revenue that comes through an indirect channel is selling an existing product or selling to an existing customer base. So if you have an existing product that's well proven in the marketplace and you have either the agent's existing customers or your existing customer base, then I believe an indirect route to market can function very, very well. Where I often caution my clients is if your growth relies on a new product or a new customer that the agent has to go and find, the data says they're not very good at that. So, and the channel of a CRM, I think, is interesting. Most of the CRM systems that I work with that are an indirect channel, agents, imagine a sales funnel has 5 stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you have a direct sales force, you can ask that they put in opportunities at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you can measure the efficiency of that engine. If you have an agent, you're very, very lucky to get them to use any system. If they will use a system, it all tends to come in at stage 4 and 5, which causes all kinds of demand and instrumentation and forecasting and manufacturing challenges for you. So again, it goes back to mindshare, LVO, for me. I think you have to be, what's the orthopedic truism? Measure twice, cut once. I find a lot of organizations are so relieved that they've got a distributor in Hungary, they take the first person they speak to. And There are a list of questions that IBM, for example, always ask all of their distributors before they work with them, just to see how sophisticated they are. And one of them is who's going to do what throughout the sales funnel and what reporting is going to be possible. And you need to have all of that aligned up front. It's impossible to persuade them to do that after the fact, after they've already signed your contract of exclusivity for 2 years. So yeah, measure twice, cut once when it comes to selecting your agents, I would say. Yeah. You've dealt with them a long time as well, Elvio, haven't you? Any advice for you about getting agents to use CRM systems?
No, I don't. But I can tell you that as a sales manager, I would be very scared to if I don't have the full visibility of the sales funnel, because if then I don't get the sales and I need to reorganize something within the process, it will take more than 1 year to rearrange it. So
I'm going to go to the audience here. We've got Paul says he agrees very much with Des on the weakness of indirect sales forces in forging new ties and launching new products. I'm just going to add something here, because Paul's original question was about capturing some of those touch points. I know that tools like Salesforce and HubSpot will capture those interactions on LinkedIn, and it will log emails and such to create the metrics and the measurements that Des said were missing. So there's a lot of it will be automated. Obviously, getting somebody to punch something into another question. Amit's asking, adding to Paul's question, you can extract a ton of data points on the multiple channels used to engage with customers. What does good look like when looking at this data? Face-to-face calls, 5 calls per day, etc., etc. What are your thoughts?
Great question. So Amit, hello, good to see you, fella. So Amit and I used to work together at J&J, and he's now one of the leaders there. So he's obviously doing very well. The key question whenever we talk about metrics is measure less. So that animal health organization that I spoke about, we did a diagnostic about how good they were at digital marketing and digital selling. Actually, from my perspective, they had too many activity-based targets. So they did say 5 calls per day, all of these different ways that we used to measure just activity. For me, it's not just about the activity. You need to find a quality metric as well, because it is possible to get 5 leads a week through your marketing automation system and still sell 0. So I think you have to be very careful about selecting no more than 2 or 3 metrics for marketing, no more than 2 or 3 metrics for sales, and making sure there's a quality element to those. And each time, I think that is going to be different based on the buying process complexity. So if you're selling a multi-million-dollar robot for $2 million, I don't think you can have the same level of activity targets and metrics in your systems as someone who's selling a stent and you're actually trying to get an existing customer to buy more. So yeah, Amit, the annoying answer I'm going to give you, I'm afraid, my friend, is it depends. But the key question is, how complex is the buying process? Based on the complexity of the buying process, complex, middle, and then relatively transactional, I think that's the first question I look at when I'm thinking about what are the 3 things we're going to measure. If you're measuring more than 3, I would say you're probably wasting your time, because your managers can't coach more than 3 metrics at a time. So, so less is more, I suppose, is my my message.
I used to work as a data analyst for Ramsey Healthcare. And the first question that we would ask when anybody came to us is, what are you going to do with this information, and how's it going to change anything? And if you couldn't get a sensible answer, or if they weren't going to do anything, it was just out of curiosity, then we'd strike it from the report. Because so Amit says, this is the conundrum we're in, my friend. So we've got another one saying from Vlad, I think that is, yeah. And Vlad saying, sales agents today look at CRM as a method of control that the manager has. How can this view be changed? And how important is the pressure of getting leads every day from every client, every single time?
And one thing I would like to thank Vlad, because he's one of the guys that was logging in a different account and was constantly pushed back by LinkedIn Live. And now he's into CommuniD. He's one of the few that was having technical problems and has sorted them.
Very good perseverance, Vlad. Well done. So hopefully we'll do it justice. I like your question in terms of it's not just agents that see a CRM system as an element of control. I think most medical device reps do believe that when I ask them what's the purpose of a sales funnel or a sales CRM system, they think it's for the manager and not for them. So the first thing I think is most other sectors like technology, you wouldn't take a job in technology without asking what is the CRM and making sure that it's seen as a way to help you manage and prioritize your time. So completely agree. I think most CRM systems are bought by finance to measure this black box of sales. I think that there are some pretty good systems now, Salesforce amongst them, that are more sales user friendly. And I think it's really important to sell the idea that it can help an individual seller manage and prioritize their time. With an agent, you do need to have that conversation before they sign the contract about what your expectations are. Otherwise, they will find the path of least resistance, which is not using any kind of technology or system. So of all the areas, I think the use of a CRM is where medical devices lag the most behind every other sector of complex business-to-business professional selling. And I've never quite figured out why that is. And I think it's because we bought very bad CRMs for many years. And a lot of them came from the pharmaceutical industry, which was, did you do your 5 calls a day? Yes, no, off you go. We know that medical devices is far more sophisticated than just 5 calls a day, off you go. So I think that's why we're dealing with this legacy of a hatred of CRM systems.
And to me, I would apply the same thing. I would apply to digital selling. So digital selling to me is helping the salespeople to sell more. It's to reach better their clients and with a multi-channel of options. So I think it's the same logic.
Yep.
Yeah, we've had some real. I know Elvia, when we've been working with some clients, we've had real challenges getting some of the, got to be said, some of the older guys and girls to embrace the digital selling environment. Really quite hard, even just to log on and set up accounts and things like that, and been quite a challenge.
For me, the point of impact is always the first line sales leaders. So your first line sales leaders are your sales culture. They're your sales technology culture or not. And therefore, they are usually the point of inference for me. If they believe in the technology and they use it, then they can coach the others to use it over time. Most learning, 70% of learning happens on the job, in the role, doing the thing. It doesn't happen by attending a 2-day training course or watching a Salesforce webinar on how to use a CRM system. So I find that digitally savvy first line leaders who are using one source of truth all the time, they're the ones that tend to get a very good uptake of technology. But don't forget, I'm not necessarily saying that CRM is the answer to all of your ills. Salesforce have told you that for 10 years. They sell a fantastic story, but CRM is just a database. It's a very nice database, but it's just a database. If you don't have a process built in that maps how your customer buys, then you could be wasting your time. I see most people use Salesforce's standard out-of-the-box 7 stages of qualifying an opportunity, speaking to them, submitting a proposal, and then negotiating. That isn't how most medical devices are sold. So you need to make sure that your CRM system captures a complex sales process, a medium complexity sales process, and a very transactional sales process. And the selling work and the metrics that you get your team to do will be different based on those things. So I think you have to be careful. You can still have fantastic digital sales without necessarily having all of the technology and the ownership. I would keep it very, very simple if you're looking at any of these things.
Definitely. We've got a question from Boris here. It says, thank you for your insights. What is your perception about the compliance rules in the UK when digitally targeting HCPs, brackets GDPR? Are they clear when it comes to digitally marketing medical device products direct to HCPs?
Elvio, is there any chance I can cross that ball and you can head that one in? I know you're more of a lover of GDPR and more up to speed with it than I am.
You know, I thank Boris for the question. I would reply to this question in a separate way. Clearly, this is a little bit out of the scope of this webinar. And instead, in the 10 minutes remaining, what I would like to do is, and Boris, please forgive me, I would like to focus on which are the models of the digital sales that you envision or that you would suggest, or, here, as Mark said at the beginning, we want to be practical. So I would like to give to the audience 2-3 digital sales method that you have in mind.
Yes. Yeah. So the first model that I came across was from a very large medical filtration company. Their idea was the broad segmentation. So let's keep strategic accounts, mid-size accounts, and then the small tail. I like what they did with the small tail. So the small tail, often people say, well, they're small value customers. Let's just give them to customer service, or let's give them to someone in telesales. I cannot tell you how poor a hiring profile that is to looking after small accounts. You need to be very skilled about having conversations and influencing people over the phone. I personally believe that people who sell over the phone are better sellers than people who sell face-to-face, because you're missing all of the verbal cues. You have to be much more precise with your language. So what Oracle did many years ago, Oracle paid very good wages to get some very high caliber salespeople and graduates, and they created an art and a science around how you sell via the phone or with digital forms of communication. I think one of the reasons it's failed on a number of occasions, LVO, is because we've kind of just thrown it over to telesales and expected that they're going to be able to do it. It's actually, I think, a difficult skill to learn. So the first element is to have digital-only sellers that just look after the long tail. So that's kind of model number one that I see. Model number two is that you have a digital-only sales force, but they are purely responsible for the top of the funnel. So they're the ones that you can make an expert in the marketing automation systems, things like Marketo. They're the ones that you can make very digitally savvy in terms of sharing video, sharing little snippets, keeping the customer small and little interactions, 140 character type things. And their primary role is just to get leads for the face-to-face sales force to pick up on and follow up on. And that, I think, is probably the most popular route that I see. People creating an in-house top of funnel sales force. And again, that has a lot of value to it. My own challenge with that is the handshake between a digital seller and a face-to-face seller needs to be very, very good. And you need to be mapping, and you need to have a really thorough process of what classifies or what warrants a sales ready lead versus a marketing ready lead. Most of the organizations that did this badly have hundreds and hundreds of leads that people in face-to-face sales haven't even phoned or picked up. So you need to make sure that after all of that energy, that handshake has to be really, really smooth. So that's model number two. And then model number three, which I think is gaining traction, is the hybrid. So the idea of making all of your face-to-face sellers digitally savvy, letting them share marketing content and allowing them to follow marketing teams' leads, but actually the ability to follow up and keep some of those things going. The challenge there is, how do you enable all of those people? Most organizations that do it well enable their sales force digitally as well. So they're the ones that have things like video playbooks. They have the ability, they have all of the content curated, ready to go at every stage of the buying process, so that salespeople don't have to work very hard to create their own content. I think that's one of the areas that I think is going to grow in the next 10 years, this idea of a hybrid seller, and the idea that face-to-face should be for certain clients that have certain levels of importance. Everyone else, you can nurture that lead, I think, digitally for a lot longer before you start getting in the car and spending money going to see them. So they're the three models that I see. So the digital only for your small customers, the digital top of funnel, and then the digital hybrid sales role.
Now, Des, I want to anticipate a question that probably will come up from the audience, because we people of the medical device business believe that we are very different to the pharma guys, and most of these models has been created by the pharma guys and by the pharma organizations. And we've already mentioned the fact that the relationship of the sales rep with the clinician in the medical device business is completely different, much deeper. So how do you think that these three models can cope with this, can cope with this technical element, depth of the interaction between the sales rep and the physician?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't necessarily believe pharma is any kind of template or role model for medical devices. I also think that pharmaceutical businesses are behind technology companies when it comes to doing this. So I don't necessarily believe that medical devices are more technically difficult to sell than some of the nuclear power generation systems or some of the other customers that sell unbelievably complex products and solutions. So if they can go digital, I don't see any reason why medical devices can't. There's another reason for me why pharmaceuticals is a very poor fit, other than the fact that it tends to be people with MBAs that go to pharmaceutical companies, go to medical device companies and think the two are similar. I think the biggest difference is their SG&A. So most medical device organizations are run pretty lean. They spend about 16-70% of their revenues on SG&A, so sales and marketing. Pharmaceuticals have much bigger budgets. They have 30 people that just run events. They have a huge number of people in digital marketing and all of these different elements. So that's why I think the comparison isn't right. But to answer your question, if you can sell very complex solutions that are non-medical via digital routes, then I don't see any reason why you can't sell medical devices via the same routes. I wouldn't get rid of face-to-face sales reps, by the way. I employed a number, of which Amit was one of the best, but I wouldn't get rid of them. I would just help them evolve and support them. So support them above the funnel, support them with the smaller customers, or support them with a new skill set. It isn't as if you need to choose one of those three models. There's no reason in my mind why you couldn't look at all three of those as a way of supporting and helping the field-based sales team that do a great job already.
And that arguably those models can morph into each other over time.
Yes, yeah, and
find yourself in a model.
Yeah, so when Elvia and I talk about models, it's which one would you go first with? I don't necessarily think that's the only one you're going to go with, but Elvio and I firmly believe that you have to pick a product that lends itself to digital marketing. You have to pick a product or a product launch, something with some kind of traction to play with this in. And that's the great thing about digital. You can try it for 3 weeks and you can get some feedback and see if it works. So that's the idea that I would probably leave everyone with is don't be afraid to go digital, but don't go big. Create yourself a little sandbox, play with it, figure out what happens. And that's the one thing Elvio and I are starting to realize is the feedback loop is very, very quick if you set up the right systems.
Yeah, Mark, and what we were saying is probably pick a geography, for instance. You pick a geography where you can try this model without creating too much of a mess, and if it doesn't work, and then if it works in one geography, then you can expand it.
Hey, look,
if you go step by step, the concept it goes step by step.
You print 100,000 brochures. You printed 100,000 brochures.
Exactly,
an expensive mistake, isn't it? Yeah, and it can literally be hundreds of pounds, can't it? With in digital, that small.
I'm a big fan of going everything digital. However, I still think the greatest marketing trick in medical devices in my 20 years is the mugs where you put hot water in it and it used to change color. So if they can find a digital way of doing that, then I'd be really impressed because that was always my favorite marketing tool.
The mouse net, yeah.
Indeed.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're sort of coming near to the top of an hour, near to an hour on this. Before I sum up sort of some of the actionable points, Des, is there anything you want to add, share, impart that maybe we haven't touched on? And you think actually, they need to know about this, and if I get nothing else across, I need to mention that.
Yes. So for those of you who create marketing messages, I would say that 80% of the marketing messages that I read that people want the sales force to go and use in some way, 80% of them are about you and your organization. So they're the why us messages or why the products. Organizations that get good traction in digital don't just take their product messages and make them on a LinkedIn campaign. But that's not what we're talking about here. I fundamentally believe the message needs to answer two different questions before it talks about you. So if you look at organizations that do well, they answer two questions before why us. The first question is, why should I change? So you need to understand the customer's world and ask them the question, why should they change from this way of doing things to another way of doing things? You need to win that argument first. Second message in your message needs to be, why now? So what is the compelling reason why waiting isn't going to work? And I think 80% of your message should be, why should you change? And why should you change now? That's an anathema to most people in medical device marketing organizations and sales organizations, because we're obsessed with the why us, and we want to beat the competition with 3 degrees versus 5 degrees versus 8 degrees. Let's have a philosophical conversation at that level. But if you haven't answered the question, why should I change and why should I change now? You're just talking at fresh air because the customer isn't listening. Yeah. So I know this is a mainly marketing organization. That would be my advice. When you're creating sales ready messaging, and I'm not saying all your product information isn't fantastically useful, because you're really going to need it in the middle of the sales process. You will still need that. But the only way to get attention at the top of the funnel is to answer the question, why change and why now? And I guarantee at least 5 or 6 people in your organization know those answers. So I don't think this is complex. I think it's just about getting some of your top performers to answer the very simple question, what's our biggest win in the last year? Why did that person change? Why did they change now? If you could take that and amplify it through marketing, I guarantee you will have more success in your messaging that gives you more leads.
The power of why.
Exactly. Yeah. Why change and why now? So not why you.
or why me?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. One of the first things I do if I'm looking at marketing copy, is I if I'm editing it, is I strike out all the times that the client has written we. If you look down a paragraph, we do this, we do that, we do that. It's like, great, fantastic, you do all those things, but you know, what about me?
About me.
Fantastic. Anyway, what about our audience? Like, let's just have a little sum up. Jess, thank you very much. That's been really interesting.
Thanks, Jess.
I hope that you found it interesting, and I hope our audience has found this interesting. I've got a couple of things that I noted while we were going through here. There was a lot, Des, and I thank you for that. There was a lot to take away there. But what was really interesting, I think, was be selective in your customer in segmenting. You can't be all things to all people, everything full-time 100%. And I mean, with our marketing hats on, that's job number one, is start to be selective. I think the other thing that I pulled out there is you don't have to do everything at once, and you can start now, but you don't have to do everything at once, and you can start to iterate towards the new world. You talked about keeping it simple, and I think that's so important as well. I'm delighted to hear what you said about measurement. But measure 3 things, not 30. It's great.
Yep.
It's fantastic. I think that the other thing as well was that within the medical device customers, if you want, was that the openness to a range of info and a range of trusted information rather than just that one-to-one relationship. And that sounds to me like great news for people who are moving towards a digital selling and a digital approach. Those were the big ones I pulled out. Elvio, was there anything I've missed there you think that stood out for you?
No, you haven't missed anything, Mark. The only thing that I would come up with after this meeting is that the transition is possible. To me, yeah. in the why this and why now, why change and why now, I can also add the fact that there's been companies that have tried this and have been successful. And I would say most of the companies that have tried this has been successful and has set this stage. So that's probably another very interesting point.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
There are success stories that now we can read.
Yeah, and you know, if you take the whole market, I don't know what the numbers are, but certainly the big players are doing it. But if you're there going, oh my goodness, we've been left behind. No, you haven't been left behind, but now is the time to maybe in 2 years' time you'll be left behind, but you move now and you'll be with the game. So that's why now. Des, thank you very much. We're going to wrap up in a couple probably 30 seconds or so. I'd just like to draw folks' attentions to a couple of things. We've got 13 articles. 13 is unlucky for some, but 13 will be lucky for you because we've chosen 13 articles that we've put on our website. 13 must-read articles from medical device sales professionals. We'll share that link on our LinkedIn page. And thank you, Jenny, for we enjoyed it too. There's also the opportunity to do a self-assessment for your business. I don't know if we have a slide on that, but again, we'll share information on that, and that's from Des, I think. Des, did you want to?
It will be in the downloadable.
I'll put it in the downloadable. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So Mark, the idea of that was here are some of the simple questions that can allow people to answer that question about random through to dynamic, and just some thoughts for that.
Yeah. Just to sort of focus you in on that. Awesome. And just a reminder that you can watch the other LinkedIn Lives that we've done, and if you want to forward this to a friend, you can forward it to your colleague. You can do that and watch it later and go back over to it. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn if you're not already.
And I would like to thank everyone for the perseverance. As we said, they have to shift probably from one account to another in order to follow us. And I can see we had a very sustained audience, sustained participation. So it means that people was jumping from one account to the other. Thanks a lot.
There's one guy. Could you got time for one quick question?
Yes, yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
Why not? I mean, we're not broadcasting this on terrestrial TV. The adverts aren't coming up in a minute, and we aim to please. Miroslav's asking, thank you for this insightful panel, lads. I want to know whether outsourcing some supportive sales functions would work for EU plus EEA plus UK medtech companies, primarily in the digital channel. That might help them save and scale in the challenging post-MDR transition market.
That's an easy one. I think that's yes. Yes.
Do you have another hour to spare?
No, I think that should and could be part of your mix to investigate. If it's cheaper, and if you have good control of the quality of the message, so that there's no reason why that couldn't be a route to market. Pharma tried that, and some pharma businesses still run with it 20 years later. So outsourcing a sales and marketing function is not impossible. There are some advantages of that over an agent rule, for example, because you can hold them more accountable. So yes, is the simple answer.
Miroslav, I hope that answered your question. We're going to call it a day now, and we'll see you next month.
Good to see you, Mark. Good to see you, Elvio. Thanks, gents.
And you, Des. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Des.